My it's Philip Ernest Wright. Ernest, being after my father and my grandfather, of course, yeah. We're virtually one of the last scissor makers in Sheffield. We do have one competitor. When I first started with my father in 1960, a few years following that, I made a list, and I couldn't put my finger on it straight away, but I still have it. And I got a list of just over 60 competitors in Sheffield within 1 square mile of us. I think it was about 62, and of course we would have made 63. We are affiliated to the cutlery industry. We come under the cutlery umbrella. It's a very diverse industry, and no one company makes the whole range of cutlery in inverted commas. When you say cutlery, people automatically think of knives and forks. It's much more diverse than that. You get pocket knives, you get trade knives, like cook's knives. You get sharpening steels, you get scissors, etc., etc. Problem with the cutlery industry, they always really undercharge for the workmanship that went into the products. But in the old days, people would work for very meagre earnings, but they would put the craftsmanship into the products. But Sheffield, the name Sheffield still counts for an awful lot even today. Around the world, and Sheffield is a protected name as well. There's nobody else in the world allowed to put "Made in Sheffield" on their products. Very protected. I started in February 1960 and straight into the shop floor. I did 10 years on the shop floor, so virtually every job that we still do. It's good when you're talking to the workforce as well, because you can use their terminology, because any pair of scissors will have about 20 different little particular points to a pair of scissors. Like i.e. the bows or the points or the screw or the setting, and they all have Sheffield terminologies for that. Well, the processes are very basically. We, fortunately or unfortunately, have to buy forgings in. Always have done. There's never been a scissor manufacturer in Sheffield that's actually created their own forging. Well, I say that there was one company, but they disappeared almost 50 years ago now. So we still buy the forgings in, which look like a scissor blade, but then the first operation is really the drilling and the countersinking, the tapping for the thread of the screw. The blades are straightened, then they're hardened in the furnace, 820 degrees centigrade. That's pretty virtually white hot. And then we temper them afterwards. The hardening process makes the blade very hard, too hard to work. So you then temper them down to give it some ductility, so you can work it with the hammer to put the set on the blade, which is necessary. They're then vibro polished, which you've seen in those little white ceramic chips. That's the next procedure. The next procedure is to grind the blades. Actually, the outside blade, which serves no useful purpose, just looks nice, doesn't actually make them cut any better or any worse. That's done before the vibro polishing. But then afterwards, which is absolutely vital, is the grinding of the inside of the blades, and that's critical, because that's what will make them cut. They're then finished before assembly. They're then finished outright to make them look right. Make the inside blade that'll cut, it's got to have the set on. Then they go for assembly. That's very very skilled work. So is the grinding. The guys downstairs have got to know what is required of the finished product to make them cut. That's obviously the main object of the exercise. Then when they're assembled, the final process before warehousing is then putting the final cutting edge on. The inside grinding of the blade, that's absolutely necessary, but then the final, just the actual edge itself is then sharpened and make sure that they actually cut, what we call from pinch to point. If, like dressmaker shears or tailor shears, they are always have been traditionally with black handles. Then following the sharpening, we then paint the handle, stove, what we call stove enameling. It's baked on, it's baked paint in, put in an oven. That's a rather funny thing that just at that point a lot of people don't realise why dressmaker shears and tailor shears have black bows, traditionally have black bows. And years ago it was just a cheap way of finishing scissors. You didn't have to process the underneath the paint. It was just a coarse forging and just a cheap way of selling them. And then they go for just the final warehousing, get all the what you might call guns, the oil and the polishing compound off the blades, and then packed for however whatever market it is. I mean, it's learned over a long period of years. You talk about apprentices, and I did a 3-year apprenticeship course. It was run for the cutlery industry, but that only just touched on really basic things, like grinding and hardening temperatures and the composition of the steel that you use and those sort of things. It was more academic work. The real skills are learnt on the shop floor. You actually got to have your scissor blade in your hand and your hammer in your hand and achieving what is designed. Getting this. You saw the guy downstairs, that was Eric, putting the curvature on the blade for curved scissor blades. So skilled. He's been doing that for years. And then of course you got to marry the bottom blade up with the top blade, and each one got to have a slightly different. The top blade's got to be slightly more acute bend than the bottom blade. It's just like a running track, really. And you don't learn that overnight.